Good evening, all. Today we're taking a look at what I've come to consider the forgotten Ferrari, the 333 SP, as it seemed most of the press coverage and hoopla around the 499P's debut focused far more on the P cars of the 60s and 70s, making their return to prototypes seem a much longer time coming than it actually was. About par for the course for modern journalism, I suppose, but let's undertake a bit to right that wrong in the next few minutes. 1992 and 1993 were, generally speaking, years that will not be remembered in sports car racing as particularly joyous ones, as GTP in the US and Group C in the rest of the world were on their final hurrahs. Although GTP did not place the same emphasis on fuel efficiency that formed the backbone of the Group C regulations, it was brought to its knees by economy just the same, as a combination of weakening balance sheets and skyrocketing costs caused most manufacturers to scale back or withdraw entirely from both series. I'll say it again, these things do certainly seem to go in cycles, don't they? Has anyone seen Audi lately? 1993, then, saw new rule sets announced intended to help keep costs under control. In IMSA, this was called World Sports Cars, or WSC. Aerodynamic development was limited, requiring a flat underfloor, so no tricksy ground effect vehicles for these hobbitses, simplified rear wings, and an open cockpit, while engines had to be at least nominally production-derived. Though disappointing in some ways after the heady days of GTP, it did at least help revive manufacturer interest, with Ferrari one of the first to announce their intent to enter the new class, which was also eligible to compete under the contemporaneous new regulations from the FIA called LMP1. Again, recurrent themes. Ferrari's return to the sports prototype world came in the form of the 333 SP, which was actually brought about and in no small way financed by the owner of the Momo Corporation, Giampiero Moretti, they of the aftermarket wheels, who harbored a dear desire to race and win races in a Ferrari prototype. Though far more solvent than the last new prototype days of the 312 and 512S, starting an entirely new car design is by no means cheap, no matter the rule set, and the infusion of cash from Signor Moretti surely helped pave the way for the development. What can only be called an all-star team was assembled to design the chassis and tune the engine, including another appearance from perennial channel characters Gianpaolo Dallara as chassis supervisor and Tony Southgate as a consultant, while Ferrari's own powertrain engineer was pulled off the Formula One beat for a little while to lead the project. Aerodynamic design was performed by Dallara, with Ferrari providing the drivetrain components, or at least sourcing them, and building the first 4 chassis. The engine was a fully stressed, naturally aspirated 4-liter V12 derived from their 1990 Formula One power plant, enlarged and detuned for reliability and endurance applications. The original, for reference, was 3.5 liters and produced around 700 horsepower, while the 130E, which is what the engine was now coded, made 640 horsepower and about 325 pound-feet of torque, despite half a liter of additional displacement. The rev limit was around 1,000 RPM lower, again for reliability, which is an attribute for which the engine received consistent praise. But wait, I've just told you that the engines had to be production-based. How, then, can Ferrari get away with using an XF1 engine? Well, they played a bit of a shell game and used the upcoming F50 road car as a red herring, despite the fact that the F50 didn't hit showroom floors until 2 years after the 333 was announced, and had a much larger 4.7-liter V12. Ferrari has a bit of a history of getting away with things that are just on the cheeky side of the regulations, which foreshadows a bit of next week's race report as well. Ooh, spoilers. The chassis was a honeycomb of carbon fiber and aluminum, as one might expect, with carbon fiber body panels, and after the initial run of 4 cars was built by Ferrari, 10 or 11 additional chassis were constructed by Dallara before subcontractor Micoletto completed an additional 26, bringing total production to 40 cars. Suspension was double wishbones and pushrods. The transmission was a 5-speed sequential unit with Hewland internals, but a Dallara-branded casing, because Italy. Power went to the rear wheels, with top speed reportedly 229 miles an hour or 368 kph, and acceleration was 0 to 62 miles an hour or 0 to 100 kph in 3.3 seconds. overall, I think we can consider those respectable performance figures. Total weight was a moderate 1,900 pounds, or 862 kgs, less driver and fluids, but frankly, the looks don't really do it for me. It is pretty generic. It looks like most of the other 90s open-topped prototypes. That's not to say it's inherently unattractive, but nothing about it actively says Ferrari to me, apart from it being painted in Rosso Corsa. Held back from competing in the first two events of the 1994 season, largely due to concerns about reliability when faced with the prospect of 24 hours running at Daytona or, far more daunting, 12 hours at Sebring, the 333 SPs, I like to think the SP stands for Special Project since it was a bit of a commission from Signor Moretti, but it probably means Sport Prototype. Competition debut came at the Road Atlanta Sprint Race. This was only 2 hours long for prototypes, well before Petit Le Mans came into existence, with 4 privateer entries, including Signor Moretti's Momo-sponsored car, wearing number 30. These cars qualified on the 4 top spots of the grid, not terribly surprising given that most of their competitors in class were modified and therefore rather hobbled old GTP cars, and finished first and second overall in the race, although the Momo car was not atop the podium of that first entry. The number 30 would go on to win the subsequent 3 races of the season, as well as second in the final 2 rounds, with Team Scandia cars taking a couple of other wins and podiums as well. 1995 brought an updated aero package, lengthening the nose, and saw wins at Sebring, Halifax, Lime Rock Park, where Signor Moretti partnered with Wayne Taylor as co-driver, interestingly enough, Texas, and Phoenix, but victory at Daytona or Le Mans eluded them. Victory would eventually come at Daytona in 1998, but they never managed a strong enough performance at Les Arth to find their way to the top step, despite 10 entries from 1995 to 1999, which produced 3 finishes, but no better than Moretti's 6th place, third in class, in 1997. Increasingly uncompetitive in the final years of the decade, the 333 kind of stuck around until 2003, although on this side of the millennium they were running a more modern Judd engine in most entries. The vehicle has proven popular in historic racing, however, with 3 examples at this year's Le Mans Classic and 1 at the Daytona Classic 24 a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it was just last week. The Lista-sponsored vehicle we've been seeing as well. Unfortunately, the Lista did not manage to make it through the weekend, with an off at turn 6 on Saturday resulting in very heavy body, suspension, and possible internal damage, and it remains to be seen whether that will be repairable. That brings us to the end of another video, and for this week's call to action not featuring the 3 sacred words of YouTube,
like, comment, subscribe.
Everyone, please take the time to check on a friend you haven't heard from in a while. They'll probably appreciate it. As always, thank you for your time this evening, or whenever and wherever you are watching, and I wish you all a good night and a good tomorrow.